Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another World Drug Safety Congress America's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we will be talking about transforming pharmacovigilance workflows with AI and automation with Perficient. We have Eugene Stefanov to start us off. He's the marketing manager at Perficient, and he'll be giving us a bit of an overview on Perficient, and then we'll be handing over to Carrie Blaho-Owens, Prabhu Ragnathan, and Christine Livingston to talk a bit more about their capabilities. Eugene, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Joan. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Eugene Stefanov. I am part of the marketing team at Perficient, and I am super excited that you've joined us for today's webinar, in which we'll discuss AI and automation in pharmacovigilance. Before we move on to a brief overview of Perficient, I'd like to cover some basic housekeeping items. You are welcome to submit questions to our speakers at any time today. They will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar, feel free to contact our speakers. Their information is available in the presentation that is attached to the handout section on your screen. You can also fill out the Contact Us form found on Perficient's website. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within several hours. All right, a little bit about Perficient. So Perficient is a global digital consultancy. We imagine, create, engineer, and run digital transformation solutions that help our customers exceed client expectations, outpace competition, and grow their business. With strategy and technology and creative capabilities, we really bring big thinking and innovative ideas, along with practical approaches to help the world's largest enterprises and biggest brands succeed. We have a broad network of locations across the US, as well as nearshore and offshore facilities in India, China, Colombia, Mexico, and Serbia. Founded in 1997, we're a public company with more than 4,500 employees. We've formed strategic partnerships with many of the major technology vendors, and we also have dedicated solution and industry practices. One of these practices is, of course, life sciences. We have relationships with many pharma, biotech, medical device, and CROs, including over 30 of the world's largest public life sciences companies. Next slide, Carrie, please. So I'm not going to read this slide in detail, but it does highlight some of our pharmacovigilance capabilities. We do have a dedicated safety and PV practice at Perficient that is headed up by Carrie, who is presenting today. Many of the folks on our team have come from the industry itself. And you can take a closer look at this slide when you receive the presentation that's currently in the handout section. Next slide, please. Great. So today we have three wonderful speakers. All of them happen to be my colleagues. I will ask each of them to give a short introduction. Carrie, do you mind starting with a little background about yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm up so I can sort of see y'all. My background is really based in pharma and CROs. I joined Perficient several years ago in pharmacovigilance and safety, and our group, as you can tell, is very diverse. We focus a lot on solving the problems that you encounter in pharma and CROs and trying to keep pace with solutions that meet regulatory requirements. As you can probably see in the background, I am the nerdy pilot type, so sorry for any of the distractions from the repurposed airport signs that we've collected over the years, but Having said that, I think that there's a lot that what you learn in aviation can bring to pharmacovigilance. So a lot of what we do is kind of governed by, good processes, good checklists, that type of thing. And we find that that's really helpful in PV. And we hope to share some interesting solutions for y'all this morning. So thanks very much.
Great. And Carrie, for what it's worth, I don't think you were sharing your camera at the moment. At least I was not seeing it. So,
Okay.
but thank you for the background. Prabha, can you go ahead and give it a little short background?
Sure. Morning, everyone. This is Prabha Ranganathan. I'm part of the Proficient team here. I have life sciences background with over 20 years developing and releasing products and applications in various companies. At Proficient, I'm part of the life sciences business unit where my team and we primarily work on clinical data warehousing and analytics solutions. And we are also primarily focusing on custom codes, custom integrations, and so on. Very happy to be here presenting the PV solution end-to-end, and looking forward to this webinar.
Awesome, thank you. And Christine.
Hi, everyone. Christine Livingston, nice to meet you. I run our artificial intelligence practice at Proficient. I've been in this space for about 5.5 years, from the very, very early stages of artificial intelligence to where it is today, which is really more broadly adopted by the enterprise. And I work very closely with our industry specialists, Carrie and Prabha, on bringing those capabilities to life within life sciences.
Awesome, thank you. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Carrie for the main portion of the presentation, and then I'll come back for the Q&A portion.
Okay, thanks, Eugene. So this morning, I thought we would start with some challenges that we're all facing within the PV landscape, addressing some of the kind of new trendy words that we're hearing, like touchless case processing. Christine is going to give a good background on what really is artificial intelligence and natural language processing automation. And Prabha will talk a little bit about the technology platform that's used for implementing these within PV. And then we'd like to sort of go through, some of the areas where we found that it's very beneficial to implement AI and automation. And we'll do a short demo of a POC that we've done called PV Osprey, which is an intake solution, and show you some of the ways that these technologies can make your lives easier. But more importantly, what we're finding across our client base is that in asking for the budget and the time to be able to take a pause and look at your processes and look at the way that you're processing cases and just the sheer volume of the work that has to be done to look at the return on investment. So we'll end kind of on that note, and then we can open it up for questions. So some challenges in PV, and some of these are not new, some of these are new. We definitely are seeing an increase in case volume, no question about that, starting in 2017 when EMA started with their new initiative of sending cases back to marketing authorization holders. We helped a lot of clients through stepping through that and finding easier ways to deal with that caseload. We have more sources of information, and I'll also say misinformation about our products. So being selective about where we look for information, what is an adverse event versus PQC, what is legitimate, what is not. There's a lot of regulatory pressure. Coming in next year is the new regulations around medical devices, and we've got new regulations around combo devices. So that's putting a lot of pressure on the PV system to ready ourselves for that. Just the sheer cost of end-to-end case processing. I think we all know that the dynamics of how we work now has changed, and maybe some of these changes will be very long lasting, so we need to learn to be very efficient. And there's more to the PV story than just adverse events and product quality complaints. We have multiple entries, if you will, into the PV system where we get information about our products. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have really good solid data that we can use to make risk-benefit determinations about our product. So there's a couple of new challenges as people expand geographically. There's language barriers, there's technology barriers. How can we overcome that? And more importantly, I want to point out what we've been talking about for a couple years now, which is moving from a reactive stage in pharmacovigilance, where we're taking a backwards look at the data into a position where we can actually be proactive. We're monitoring the safety profile of our products. We're able to see small changes that could turn into very large changes and to address those in a more real-time situation. So this is where technology can really help you in allowing digested data to come out of your adverse event product quality database, no matter which database you're using, and to be able to analyze and to pair skill set to task, so that we're not just day-to-day just entering information into a database and just pushing it through the workflow. We want to actually be able to see what that data looks like in aggregate. So here you see a typical workflow where you have intake, and there can be multiple points of entry into the case flow, from a call center to a web-facing form. Some people like to text. Some people like to still write or fax paper letters. There can be literature. So all of those things have to come into some central intake system. And then you have data entry and case processing. The case will typically go through a QC step at some point, sometimes multiple, just depends on your organization. Then case processing against what are your case processing guidelines. And we can't emphasize enough, technology is a great thing in PV, but without having good guidances on how you deal with the data, what are your guidelines on particular adverse events and how are you surveilling it, technology can't fix that. We need to be able to pair technology with good processes. And then finally, submission of individual cases either to the regulatory authority or to safety data exchange agreement partners. And then we have, of course, the aggregate reports, which we all know is a larger endeavor of taking all of the information in aggregate and then submitting that. So anything that you see highlighted in kind of this lovely pink color are areas within the PV holistic system, if you want to call it that, or the workflow that can benefit from some type of automation, NLP, or repetitive process automation. So Prabha, I'll turn it over to you here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. So this is a high-level data flow from end to end of the systems, which Carrie just talked about. The one on your left is PV Osprey, which is our intake application. And the one on the right is PV Hawk, which is our analytics visualization tool. So going from left to right, you can get the cases in various formats, like Carrie mentioned. It could be a text, it could be an audio, it could be fax, it could be any paper mail, it could be any one of those. So now you get the data, and it could be entered in a web form as part of entering the adverse events. So now you have the data, you parse the data, and the technologies used behind all the AI technologies. Christine will be going briefly over them in the next few slides, so I'm going to skip through those. So now you get this data, you pass through it, and you look at these symptoms and indications, and then you parse the code. You would do, apply some coding on the data which you have. And now once you have the data from the text, you convert it into XML files. So the XML files are then created in the E2B format. You can invoke some APIs from the Osprey application to your safety system. So for example, Argus has a way where you can send an E2B file, and then you can create the cases within Argus. So the data flows into your safety systems, and this integration is a plug and play integration where it's not only for Argus, you can do for any safety system you have, provided they have the APIs to support loading the E2B files. If not, we need to do some custom integrations in that area. So now you have the case information in your safety system, and based on the Medra coding and doing some analysis on the data that we got, we could also determine the priority of the AE that was entered, and you can create the case in the safety system. Now that you have the case in the safety system, I'm going to talk briefly about the PV Hawk solution, where you get the data from your safety into a data lake, and you also get data from FDA data, which is published once every quarter, and also UDRA vigilance data. And you can overlay your data on the FDA data and look at how the drugs are performing, how many cases were reported, and how many, for a given period of time, and which geographic locations these cases are, and so on. There are a whole bunch of out-of-the-box visualizations that we have built as part of PV Hawk. So this is in short, the high-level data flow from starting with your intake application, converting all the text into a data that your safety system can understand, and then loading that data into a data lake for further analysis. I hope this gives an end-to-end picture of the end-to-end data flow. And Christine, over to you.
Thanks, Prabha. So on the next slide, you'll see a little bit more. Artificial intelligence is still a very broad space. There's a lot of different capabilities that fall underneath that umbrella. And when we leverage automation and artificial intelligence in the pharmacovigilance landscape, we're looking to leverage multiple components. But one of the critical elements that really can help accelerate some of the automation in this space is natural language processing. And this is really the field that's focused on understanding context and syntax, and not just looking at the specific words that are used, right? So again, a somewhat silly example here, but when someone says break a leg in a hospital setting or a medical setting, that has something very different than in a theatrical setting. And if we just look at the words that are used and we're not trying to understand the surrounding context and syntax and information we have about the situation, we'll often misinterpret the meaning of the specific words that are used. This is critically important to understand the adverse event intake process. And so when we look at some of the applications of natural language processing, on the next slide, there's some high-level applications, including classification and entity extraction. Those are some of the key capabilities that we're using in this particular solution space, where we're understanding the class of information that's being provided. But really, one of the key things that we're doing is entity extraction. It's really this transformation of a large body of unstructured data to structured data elements that we can use in the downstream processing. So in the slide that Prabha was just walking through, we were able to take a narrative that a human speaks, and we're able to use natural language processing and machine learning to break that down into structured data elements that can be brought into your PV landscape and your enterprise data warehouse. So if we look at kind of the next slide, there's a little bit of an example of what this may look like when you start to bring in adverse event information. On the next slide, there you'll see a sentence that was really actually verbatim from a generally available source of information where someone said the evening of vaccination, developed neck pain, progressed to multiple muscle joint skin pain. And we start to take this paragraph or this narrative information that was entered when someone was describing the symptoms that they had following a vaccination, and we're able to apply natural language processing to do entity extraction. You'll see some of the different things that are highlighted. But again, one of the critical things to keep in mind is we're not just doing a keyword search. We're not just looking for specific words, because the context in which those words are used really tells us how to interpret the information as a whole. And so you'll see very simple examples, right, where you can start to look at the reaction source, associated measure code with that. But when you start to look at some of the symptoms that might be pulled out, you can see sweats were pulled out, respiratory symptom. But one really important data point there is look at how we're able to interpret modality and start date. So when we look at a positive modality, we understand that in the context of this particular sentence, sweats were a symptom that this patient experienced. When we look at respiratory symptoms, this is something that they specifically did not experience, right? So we're not just doing a search for keywords, we're trying to understand all the surrounding context. And by looking at these 5 or 6 data elements associated with that particular symptom, we're able to interpret the meaning of that particular paragraph. And if something is a negative symptom, meaning it doesn't exist, we're not going to actually monitor start and end dates and duration. So this is a little example of what's kind of going on behind the scenes as we're breaking down unstructured language. And Carrie is going to show you a quick demo of what this actually looks like.
Thanks, Christine. Let me just work through, sorry. Let me just work through all of the ons and offs. So what we've designed, Christine, Prabha, and I, as well as with our team, is looking, we had a client who has anticipated a large intake increase in their case volume. And so what they were looking for were really 2 things. One was a harmonized way in which they could do data entry, and 2 was to look at a way to compensate for the high volumes of cases that they were seeing without having to necessarily increase resources proportionally. So we came up with a POC that's sort of based on a Microsoft technology, and it follows what Christine and Prabha have told you as far as the underlying supporting technology. So bear with me just for a second while I pull it up and be able to show you how we can actually do that. So there's a couple ways that you can implement NLP and automation of your intake system. And so we have this POC that we began developing for one of our clients. And again, it was strictly for compensating for increased adverse event case numbers and product quality complaints, but also secondly, to help support them and expand geographically. And so one of the things that was a mandate was please create, we're having trouble with the types of information that we're getting. It's not consistent globally. We're missing some key elements, and that causes rework on top of the increase. And when I say increase, they were looking at a 40% increase in case volume. So by designing a form, and I won't go through that and make you sit through painful data entry into a form, but you can picture a call center rather than directly into a database having a very short form with a lot of pull-down menus, and then going to an interface where you can basically type in what the verbatim narrative is, and then it will take that along with the other elements of data, put it into an E2B XML file, and we're using Argus today, but it can be database agnostic, and using an API, it basically will appear as a case within Argus. So let's take a couple examples of a case. So this is somebody who received, and again, this is data that comes from a public source. We've changed the name of the product to an antibiotic called tankmethicillin, which doesn't really exist. I think in my next life I would like to actually do the brand naming for drugs. But so this is a patient who received the IM antibiotic, and what they're calling in is to say that they chills, nausea, there was no vomiting, and intermittent weakness. And all you have to do is click here. And as you'll see, it will begin to pick up some of the adverse event terms. So we've got dizziness already coded to your measure, and chills are coded here. And you'll see that nausea was not picked up. One of the things about NLP, and Christine can certainly speak to this much more deeply, is that it's really important that you have a set of data where NLP can almost be customized to look at the way that you code terms, because we know that everybody codes events slightly different. For example, in anaphylaxis, some people may say, okay, if the patient presents lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's considered anaphylaxis. Other people may code the individual symptoms and code anaphylaxis, and there can be various ways to get to the same thing. But in this UI, so I've filled in all of my information about my patient, and I've gone to the UI, I've put into their AEs. Then basically what happens is you have a XML file that's generated, and let me show you in Argus where you can pick up that case. Okay, so you should be able to see Argus. We're using 8.1.2, and you can see that you have all of your tabs above, and you see that you have, I've gone ahead, by the way, this morning, and just for the sake of ease, I've gone ahead and entered these cases early, but you can see that when you go to the pending cases that Argus is ready to pull in, you can select the case that you just did. So I know that I have this case, I can accept it, and I'll put in my password, and I'll just put in testing because we're just in a testing environment, and then I'll upload the case. And then I can go to Argus and I can open it up and take a look at that case. Okay, so you can see in my XML, I've captured all of the general information. I've captured the patient information, but more importantly, I've also now auto-coded my adverse events. So I've gotten rid of entering all the information in Argus from screen to screen. I've got my patient information, I've got my products, and I've got my events. It coded for chills, it coded for dizziness. Tachycardia was also listed, and so you can kind of fine tune this, and this goes back into the natural language processing or machine learning. And then you can basically, whatever you've typed into your narrative will show in your narrative screen. So you eliminated your data entry, you've eliminated your duplicate check, you've eliminated your meta coding. You know going in whether this is a serious or not serious, so you can skip ahead almost to having somebody briefly look at the case, take a look at the source documents. The XML will come in attached as an attachment, and then you can send it right on to if you like. So let's take a look at a second and third, and then we can come back to Argus. So I'm going to go back to the UI. Okay, so I'm back in. I've received another call. This time I have another patient who's received my IM antibiotic, and they have injection site soreness. They have a swollen arm, and they have redness. And they also felt feverish. And one of the things to note here is that the same measure term can often have different language descriptions. So that's where it's important to have that time for the NLP model to be able to learn the individual nuances of your data. So some people may say, I feel feverish, which codes to pyrexia. Some people may say, I had fever. Some people may say, I feel hot all over. There's always going to be differences, and it's important as this NLP model matures within your system that you get those nuances as you would use them for your own data. So I've got erythema for redness, and then I've got injection site pain for soreness, and then see it's coded injection here, and I would reject that so that next time it paired injection soreness or injection redness, that it would say like injection site reaction, for example. So I can go here, and I've got my XML, and through API that'll go right in to Argus. And then let's take a third. I think we have time for one more. This one I want to use kind of as a teaching moment because you notice in some of the steps when we were talking about the PV workflow, there were things that we probably can't automate or we can't apply AI fully at this time. And one of those is really looking at the context of the case as a whole. And Christina and Prabha both mentioned that there are, there's the absolute said versus let's use our power of thinking in analysis and let's analyze this case. So I have who called in and said that they had a sore arm, they had a fever, they had chills, they had aching muscles, flu-like symptoms. Isn't it amazing how when you are typing in front of a lot of people, you never type well? I've also got swollen lips, difficulty breathing, and I've got itching all over. So right now, I'm getting a little bit concerned because I'm seeing localized type reactions to an injection. This could be a vaccine, this could be an antibiotic, an antiviral, but I'm also seeing some things that clinically would make me concerned. When I start oral airway swelling, like swollen lips, I start seeing shortness of breath, and I start seeing itching all over. It really looks to me like an allergic reaction that could be something a little bit more than just your typical itching at the side of the reaction. So you'll see that it takes these and it has injection site pain because we've had time now to take the NLP and say when we see sore arm, that actually translates to injection site pain. We've got fever, which codes to pyrexia. We've got chills coding to the PT. And we've got aching muscles. We can probably fine tune this with time and have myalgia, or you can have muscle pain if that's what you prefer. Flu-like symptoms or influenza-like illness is the corresponding measure term. I've got lip swelling, I've got dyspnea, and I've got pruritus. So I'm going to transfer this into an XML, and I'm going to send this over to Argus. So let's see what shows up when we take a look at Argus. Okay, so here we are back at Argus, and we can see that we have these two cases that are ready to load. Let's take a look by accepting the ICSRs. Let's take a look at the one where I had the oral airway swelling. I had swollen lips, and I had the shortness of breath. That one is a little bit more concerning to me because that could actually turn out to be something that is a little bit more than just a mild allergic reaction. So I'm accepting the cases into Argus, and you can bulk submit. So you could go through and you could check these off or have your case processor check these off, make sure they're not duplicates. And then we'll take a look at the case, the third one that I was a little bit concerned about. Okay, so I had injection site pain, I had injection site erythema, and I had swelling. And in my form, my intake form that I had, I also have a little bit of details on this particular patient. So sorry, let me just process this real quickly. Okay. Using form, all of my patient information is coming over. So I've got Jane Doe, and I want to take a look at the products that she received, or what drugs did she receive. So I see that she got the kind of the faux drug that we're talking about today, but I also see medication she's taking benazepril. So it puts in perspective when assessing this case, it's serious or it's not serious. So my main drug, I've got a second drug on board, and you can see where I would probably go ahead and follow up on this case, but because this patient is taking benazepril, and we know that the ACE inhibitors can cause edema or an anaphylactic type reaction, I'm not really sure whether or not this is due to the drugs administered or if this is a secondary adverse event from a concomitant medication. So here's one of the areas where automation and AI, you can get to this much faster, but you may not be able to completely replace it. So in essence, what we've done is we've created a form that is very specific for a particular client, captures all of the elements that they want. We've been able to go to an interface where we can put in the verbatim term as the patient or the physician or investigator is reporting them. It will plug those terms both in the verbatim in the narrative, and it will also put it into measure terms, and it will, through an API, upload it into Argus. And if I'm really good with this, this takes maybe a couple of minutes at the most. So let's take a look at kind of the overall benefits of what does this really mean in terms of impact to my workflow. Okay, so basically just taking the one section of my PV workflow, which is intake. And intake could come from a call center, it can come from a web-facing way that patients can come and enter the data. It can come in through faxes, it can come in through mail, it can come in from social media. There's many different ways. But if I harmonize this and I have a point where I'm collecting the same information, basically through using just a smart approach and saying, okay, everyone is going to use this one form, for example, and we're going to fill this out, and this will be our source docs. I can actually take the information, and now I have harmonized data intake globally. And I can even fine tune those forms where some of the fields are a must before they actually go into the database. It's definitely resource and time savings. We have one more slide where we can actually show you what the return on investment might look like. You can increase case volume without increasing headcount. And this has always been one of the conundrums in the pharmacovigilance world. What if I had a vaccine, for example, influenza vaccine? I know that during the flu season, I'm going to have an uptick in my adverse events, and maybe during the rest of the year, I may have less, and I may need less people to help case processing if I'm doing it just the standard way. Same thing can be said for antihistamines, unless you live in the South like me, where we just take them like we take vitamins because we always have allergies. You may see seasonal ups and downs. You may see an uptick for unknown reasons, or as you expand geographically. This can help you decrease your compliance risk because you have a process and you have technology supporting that process that allows you to have complete information that's going into your database. You can reduce the number of cycles going back and forth between an investigator site. If you have a form that the investigator is filling out, that can go straight away into your adverse event or whatever database you may be using. And the case is ready there, it can already be assessed, and it goes in, and you're ready to look at the data in aggregate. And then we've heard a lot lately about decreasing the number of times we have to quote unquote touch a case, so that we can go to touchless case processing, or we can go to at least a state where we don't have to do so much of the manual work related to that. And that's one of the good things, that just taking this one area in PV and saying, okay, this is a real pain point for me. How can I make it better through processes, and how can I have technology to support this? And then reduce training for new resources that may be allocated for intake. So during a recall, for example, and hopefully none of us ever have to face that, but we know when we have a time where we have a product quality complaint, we have a recall, we need to spool up very quickly to be able to answer the influx of calls that we're going to receive. Having this type of technology allows us to be flexible and to absorb those increased numbers of calls or complaints, and we can still be in compliance and still not be overwhelmed. And like the other day when I called to get a light bulb for my refrigerator, they said, you are in the queue and your estimated wait time is 61 minutes. Well, nobody's going to hold for that long. That's not the kind of experience that we want to give to patients or physicians who are looking for information. So all of these things, again, just with a simplified approach into one of the segments of your PV workflow. And if you want to take a business case and you want to actually look at what the return on investment is, I'm not going to read every single thing from this table. I'm going to kind of focus on the high level. But basically what I did was I broke it down into the steps that a case would go through to get into a database. So I've got, I'm assuming here that I'm getting my case from a call center.
And Carrie, we actually don't see that screen that you're sharing.
Oh, is it sharing now?
No, it's showing Argus. There you go. Now it's showing the slide.
Okay, thanks. So if I take just the traditional on top, the traditional workflow where I would answer the phone, I would take down the information and I would process it, and then I would send that over to my data entry workflow, and then I would just do the meta coding. So we're not assessing the case, we're not doing anything. Let's say that it takes you 15 minutes on a call to get all the information. Using a smart form where I'm filling it out as I speak to somebody, I can cut that time down to 9 minutes because I'm very focused on what questions I need to ask. I don't have to necessarily miss any data points. For a non-serious case, I can cut it down from 10 to 7 minutes. And I totally made these numbers up, so this is not anybody's real data. So if I look at the hours that it takes me, if I have a case volume of 10,000 cases per year, which is not unreasonable, it would take me about 2,500 hours to enter just from the call center, just to get the information entered for a serious case, and it would take me about 1,600 or so hours for non-serious. If I look at putting in place the solution that we just showed you, where you're intaking the information into a form, you're entering the verbatim into a user interface, and that's providing you with the meta coding, and then it's auto uploading through XML E2B the measure terms. I can basically save 1,500 hours from the normal process. If I look at complete data entry, and sometimes that can be very complex depending on if it's a clinical trial or if you have a lot of information, I can cut this down to 15 minutes perhaps, because I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at those fields, make sure everything is in there. I'm going to take a look at the NLP model. I would spend about 5,000 hours for data entry, and that's probably on the low side depending on the complexity of your product for serious, and about 3,300 for non-serious. Using the platform that we just showed you, we can save 2,500 hours a year for serious and about 1,600 for non-serious. And then the measure coding. We do have, depending on what database you're using, we do have some auto coding features that some of the databases will allow you to do. But let's say that you don't. Let's say that your database relies solely on the person coding the terms. Here's where you can start to see where we're tightening that process because we're harmonizing what term goes to what verbatim goes to what measure term. So I can cut that down basically to about 2 minutes. And I can save about 1,250 hours just on the measure coding piece if I have 10,000 cases a year. So without any type of AI, NLP, or automation, I'm spending 13,000 hours a year just getting my cases from the call center into a place where it's ready to be assessed and really reviewed for the fine points like we told you, like we went through on the case with oral airway swelling. I can cut this down to about 6,900 hours. So not quite half, but a significant amount. So if I'm going to make a business case for this, and I'm going to say, you know what, I think this something like this would really be helpful for my PV organization, what does that really mean? How am I going to be able to put that business case together to present to executive staff to show them that I'm not just wasting this money, but actually there is a return on my investment, an ROI. So if I have 10,000 cases, I know that I am going to cut that down to around 6,900 hours per year from 13,000. And if I just ballpark a resource at $100 an hour, which may be high or may be low depending on what resource you're talking about, in my first year, I can actually save around $691,000. And this is just time and resource, because what are our most valuable items? It would be both resources and it would be time. And then if I look at 5,000 cases, I can save in the first year around $345,000. If I am up in a higher volume, either PQC and or AE, remember these are cases, $3.5 million a year, because I'm gonna basically spend 34,000 hours, and if you think about a 40% increase, that would be a tremendous amount of time. So all of this money that you're saving in terms of time, resources, are things that can be reinvested back into your PV system, or they can go back into your organization for other types of enhancements or improvements or bonuses, if you will. So that pretty much concludes what we wanted to show you today. And Eugene, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome, cool, thanks. And if all of you guys can show yourselves on screen, that would be great. So we have a bunch of questions. I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but I will ask them the way they were stated. So we'll try to make as much sense of them as we can. They were asked throughout the presentation, so it might be hard to make a lot of sense out of them right away. So first question is, SAEs are very critical in PV. How much reliable are they, or execute 100% of what is received through a voice rather than text typed? I'll let you guys decide who can take that one.
So is the question, how accurate is the speech recognition model, essentially? Like how well can it transcribe speech to text?
Severe adverse events, SAEs, can be detected.
Sure. So we've done several speech recognition models that operate very well in the healthcare and life sciences space. So you've got kind of two steps in the process that have to happen when you've got spoken communication versus written, right? So when we do the initial transcription, you're actually able to, again, use machine learning based speech recognition models and train them to understand the language of your industry. So you're able to do specific linguistic training to understand medical terms and concepts. We've done this successfully in the past. And then once you get that accurate transcription, you're using natural language processing to do the identification of the SAE and to really interpret what was said and the information that you need to extract for case processing.
Awesome, thanks. The next question is, can your system handle social media intake? And do you have any implementations using social media?
So we can definitely take in information from a variety of sources. Again, it's really just about understanding the channel of engagement. And when we think about training artificial intelligence, we often think about training the brain to interpret information. That's the really hard part, right? And then you can source that information from many different places, and you're really just tailoring and tuning your model or your intelligence to interpret some of the nuances of that channel. For example, in social media, you might be limited to a very short number of characters versus having a very verbose conversation that you might have on the phone. So we're able to take in information, whether it's written, spoken. We've even integrated AI-based systems with things like a smart speaker, like an Alexa or Google Home. So you're able to take in a variety of information. Again, that can be written or spoken, and accurately interpret that, leveraging the intelligence that we're really focused on training.
Awesome. So I think you answered another question that was asked on reading scanned documents full of text. Let's see. Does the AI NLP differentiate a medical term such as fever between a medical history and an AE? Since fever could be medical history or AE, since fever could be medical history or AE that occurred after the drug is taken.
Yeah, and that's true really of any symptom, right? Any symptom can be described that way. And that's really, when I was talking about understanding context and syntax, that's why we're not just looking for specific keywords, right? We're really breaking down grammatically what we understand about the situation, and you're also taking into account external factors that you're aware of, again, based on the channel and method of communication. So we're using the context of what was spoken to determine, is this something that's being experienced or something that's not being experienced? Is this something that happened in the past? Is it something that happened moving forward? And it's really leveraging natural language processing is, again, built fundamentally on machine learning. So it's learning how to interpret information the same way people do, where we would, again, take into account a variety of information inputs to determine what someone is trying to communicate. So it is able to distinguish context and determine, is this part of someone's health history? Is this a current symptom? And typically what will happen is you'll have confidence levels associated with those interpretations and that output. And so if there are scenarios like that, sometimes maybe someone doesn't explicitly state whether it's a current or past symptom, and you either have an opportunity to disambiguate, or you would just associate a low confidence interval with that particular symptom and pass it for further human review. So you're able to also kind of triage some of the incoming information and assign human follow-up for those elements that the AI and NLP is not able to accurately interpret.
Awesome, thanks. So we have about 1 more minute and at least a dozen questions left, so we're not going to get to them, but we'll try to answer them personally after this webinar. Follow up with you. So if you don't mind, Carrie, to switch to the next slide. There's a little slide that talks about upcoming webinars.
Carrie, you're on mute.
You should be able to see it now.
We see the ROI of automation, that slide. But in the meantime, so we have 2 upcoming webinars. One is happening later this month. The topic is Clinical One, which is Oracle's new clinical development platform. we are presenting alongside with the SVP there at Oracle. And next month, we also have a webinar in which we're demonstrating Clinical One, the Clinical One application. So feel free to register for these webinars. You'll find the links in the handout section. So just to wrap it up, if you have any questions after this webinar, feel free to reach out to Carrie, Prabha, or Christine. Their contact info is in the presentation. We'd love to chat with you. And thank you so much for everyone's time today. We hope that you found this webinar helpful, and we look forward to having you join a webinar in the future. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Eugene, and thank you to all the panelists as well for such a great session. As Eugene said, if you are interested in learning a bit more about Perficient, please do feel free to reach out to him. We'll be sending out a follow-up email in a couple of hours after this session, and that email will include the recording for this session and Eugene's contact details as well. We did have quite a lot of unanswered questions during the session, so we'll put together some kind of ebook, and that will be available on our website with all of those answers in there as well. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.